The Federal and Chettinadu Public School jointly present Run for Health Karegudi Marathon 2025 on March 2. This event is co-presented by Global Mission Hospital and Research Institute, powered by Repco Home Finance, associate sponsor Sethu Bhaskara College.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise program, a weekly program in which we deconstruct the latest developments in international politics. Here are a few takeaways from the ongoing peace talks between the United States and Russia to end Russia's war against Ukraine. The war was never about Ukraine. Though on the face of it, it looked like the issue was Ukraine's entry into NATO, which Russian President Vladimir Putin opposed. That was only a smokescreen. It was never a war in a strict sense to begin with. It was a clear invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And we have a situation where Ukraine has been defending itself for the last 3 years, since February 24th, 2022, when Russian forces entered Ukraine. The war, for want of a better word, was between the US and Russia. Ukraine was a mere pawn in the bigger battle between a superpower and an ex-superpower. And contrary to what US President Donald Trump stated, it was not Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky who was responsible for the war. It was the US under former President Joe Biden that kept insisting that Ukraine would join the US-led European military alliance, NATO. Despite Putin's warning that a NATO nation on its doorstep would constitute a security threat to Russia, Biden insisted that Ukraine would join NATO. And Russia invaded Ukraine to preempt this possibility. Now, 3 years later, Trump is walking out of the war that the US instigated. And Zelensky, who refused to talk peace with Putin, is now left in the lurch. Irony of ironies, Zelensky is being blamed by Trump for provoking the Russian invasion. Peace is always a good ideal. But the brazen manner in which Trump is going about it is very much in keeping with the way the United States has done things in recent times. After invading Afghanistan in 2001 and occupying it for 2 decades, the US literally fled the country, leaving the Afghan people at the mercy of the fundamentalist Taliban. Similarly, the US invaded Iraq in 2003. Once Saddam Hussein was caught and hanged, the US left the country, leaving Iraq in a mess, triggering the emergence of the deadly Islamic State that wrought unspeakable havoc on the people, particularly on the Shia and smaller communities like the Yazidis. The moral of the story is crystal clear. The US acts in its own interest, period. It cares little about others. Coming back to Ukraine, who is accountable for the deaths of thousands of Ukrainians, damage to the country's infrastructure, and the displacement of millions from their homes? Worse, Ukraine has lost considerable swathe of territory to Russia along the east and south of the country. Today, Russian forces are occupying these areas, like in the Donbas region. Putin has stated that Russia is not returning these territories to Zelensky. He wants a buffer between Russia and Ukraine. Trump does not appear to be pressing Putin to return these territories to Ukraine. Instead, he appears to be arm twisting Zelensky to accept peace at any cost. The Europeans, the United States' closest allies, have once again come across as irrelevant in the overall scheme of things. Trump does not care about a decades-long relationship with his European allies. He knows they will fall in line eventually. The Europeans might self-righteously cry foul that they should be included in the peace talks with Russia and that without Ukraine, there cannot be an agreement. But the simple fact of the matter is that since the end of the Second World War, Europe has lost its clout and worse, its spine. It cannot and has never stood against any of US's actions, however unfair they might be. A small howl here and a frown there is all that Europe can manage. Trump knows this very well. That is the reason he cares two hoots for European sensibilities. Take the case of the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Before the invasion, France and Germany objected to US plans. So did Russia. They were all set to veto a US resolution seeking UN Security Council permission to invade Iraq. What did the US do then under George W. Bush? It simply ignored the Security Council and invaded Iraq. The resolution was never put to the vote. So, what was the reaction of the dissenting nations in Europe? Nothing much. They played along with the US. Their initial objections amounted to nothing. In May 2018, Trump, in his first term, walked out of the Iran nuclear deal, in which the Europeans were co-signatories. After some formal objections, the European allies did nothing and the deal fell apart. Trump had his way. In the current instance, when the US and Russia are talking peace, the same story is most likely to follow. After some objections and maybe some serious resistance, Europe will ultimately follow Trump like sheep. Trump, being a hard-nosed businessman, has the uncanny ability to call the bluff. In this case, Europe's. Zelensky must be regretting the day when he acquiesced to the British Prime Minister, the then British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who convinced him not to sign a peace deal with Russia. This happened in the initial days after the conflict broke out, when peace talks were on. There were reports that Ukraine and Russia were about to agree on some kind of a deal when Johnson reportedly intervened against it. Zelensky backed off, reposing total faith in his so-called Western friends who promised to back him all the way, monetarily and militarily, to resist Putin. With the latest twist in the tale following Trump's election for a second time, there is no choice but to write a requiem for Zelensky and Ukraine, the latest in a long line of US betrayals. Thank you.
The Federal and Chettinadu Public School jointly present Run for Health Karegudi Marathon 2025 on March 2. This event is co-presented by Global Mission Hospital and Research Institute, powered by Repco Home Finance, associate sponsor Sedhu Bhaskara College.